April 18, 1955. Princeton Hospital is shrouded in a heavy, silent fog. On a cold examination table lies the body of the man who bent time and space. But as the world mourns the loss of Albert Einstein, a quiet crime is being committed in the shadows of the morgue. A silver-handled saw cuts through the skull, and a 1.2-kilogram organ, the seat of modern physics, is removed, not for autopsy, but for abduction. This is not a scientific procedure. It is the beginning of a 40-year macabre road trip across America, where the world's most famous brain would be hidden in cider boxes and pickle jars. Today on Wikivedia Plus, we will uncover the surreal and dark odyssey of Albert Einstein's stolen brain. Let's dive in. The story begins with a betrayal of final wishes. Albert Einstein was a man who wanted no monument. He understood the human tendency to worship relics, and he found it distasteful. He left strict instructions: cremate my body and scatter the ashes in an undisclosed location. He feared his remains would become a site of morbid pilgrimage, a circus for the curious. But Thomas Harvey, the pathologist on duty that morning, saw something else entirely. He didn't see a man's final request, he saw a biological miracle. He saw a key to the ultimate mystery of human existence. Without permission from the family, without legal authority, and under the guise of a standard autopsy, Harvey placed the brain in a jar of formaldehyde and walked out of the hospital. This moment would forever alter the course of his own life and the legacy of the man he admired. When the theft was eventually discovered, the world was in a state of shock. How could the brain of the century simply vanish? Einstein's son, Hans Albert, was initially furious, ready to pursue every legal avenue to recover his father's dignity. However, Harvey was a man possessed by a singular, obsessive vision. He used the persuasive power of a scientist claiming to work for the greater good. He managed to convince Hans Albert that the brain was too precious to be destroyed. He argued that it held the secrets to human evolution and that it must be studied for the sake of all mankind. He made a solemn promise: the brain would only be used for serious, rigorous scientific research, and the findings would be published in elite journals. But Harvey was no neuroscientist. He was a pathologist with a trophy, a man who had stolen a piece of the future and didn't know how to unlock it. His obsession came at a heavy cost. Harvey was fired from his position at Princeton when he refused to give the brain up. His professional reputation began to crumble. Even his personal life was consumed by the jar in his possession. His marriage collapsed under the weight of his paranoia and the literal weight of the organ he kept in his home. Eventually, Thomas Harvey vanished. He retreated into the vast landscape of the American Midwest, taking his silent companion with him. For decades, the brain was a ghost, a whisper in the annals of science. The brain moved from state to state like a fugitive. It was hidden in a basement in Wichita, Kansas. It sat on shelves in laboratories in Missouri. It traveled in the back of moving trucks and rested in quiet suburban garages. Harvey had sliced the brain into 240 meticulously numbered blocks, preserved in a substance called celloidin. These pieces, along with 12 sets of histological slides, were the only things he truly valued. He kept them in 2 large mason jars, tucked inside a nondescript cardboard box that once held apple cider. The man who revolutionized the universe, who gave us E=mc², was now a collection of gray fragments tucked beneath a beer cooler in a doctor's study. But as the jars sat in a basement in Kansas, a chilling question emerged. Was the secret of genius hidden in the folds of the flesh, or was the world chasing a ghost? While Harvey waited for the right moment to reveal his treasure, the scientific community began to wonder if the brain of a genius was actually any different from that of a common man. Is brilliance a matter of neurobiology, or something more ethereal? The silence was finally broken in 1978. A young, tenacious reporter named Stephen Levy was assigned the impossible task of finding Einstein's brain. After a series of dead ends, he tracked Harvey down to a small medical office. When Levy asked the question, "Where is the brain?" Harvey didn't hesitate. He reached into a cardboard box in the corner of his office and pulled out the mason jars. The images captured that day of the fragmented genius floating in yellowing preservative shocked the public. The relic was real. It hadn't been lost to history. It had been hiding in plain sight. This revelation sparked a new wave of scientific interest. Harvey, perhaps feeling the pressure of his age, began to fulfill his promise. He started sending tiny, sliver-sized samples to researchers around the world. One of the first was Marion Diamond at the University of California, Berkeley. In 1985, she published a paper claiming that Einstein's brain had a significantly higher ratio of glial cells to neurons than the control group. Glial cells are the support cells of the brain. They provide nutrients and oxygen. The implication was that Einstein's neurons were working harder and needed more fuel. Later, in 1999, the Canadian researcher Sandra Whittleson conducted a study on the photographs Harvey had taken before sectioning the brain. She discovered that Einstein's parietal lobe, the area responsible for mathematical and spatial reasoning, was 15% wider than the average brain. Furthermore, a specific groove called the Sylvian fissure was partially absent, which some theorized allowed his neurons to communicate more efficiently, creating a sort of superhighway for thought. Yet, despite these findings, the scientific community remained divided. Many argued that these anatomical differences were not the cause of his genius, but perhaps the result of it. The brain is plastic. It changes based on how we use it. Did Einstein have a math brain, or did his decades of intense mathematical visualization shape his brain into what it became? The stolen brain became a philosophical and biological battlefield, a symbol of our desperate desire to quantify the unquantifiable. By the late 1990s, an aging and weary Thomas Harvey decided it was time for the Odyssey to end. He was in his 80s, and the burden of the brain had become too heavy. In a bizarre final act of penance, he decided to return the brain to Princeton. He didn't send it via a secure courier. Instead, he embarked on one last road trip across America. He drove a 1988 Buick Skylark, accompanied by a freelance writer named Michael Paterniti. The brain sat in a Tupperware container inside a duffel bag in the trunk. They drove across the heartland of the country, stopping at diners and motels, with the remains of the 20th century's greatest mind bouncing along the interstate. During the trip, Harvey even visited Einstein's granddaughter, Evelyn, in California. It was a surreal meeting a man who had spent his life guarding a stolen piece of her grandfather standing on her doorstep. Eventually, the road trip ended where it all began. Harvey surrendered the remaining pieces of the brain to the University Medical Center of Princeton. Today, most of what remains of Albert Einstein's brain is kept at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. It is one of the few places in the world where the public can see the thin slices of the organ that once thought of the theory of relativity. It is displayed with a mix of reverence and clinical detachment. The story of Einstein's brain is a story of human obsession. It is a story of how far we will go to capture the essence of greatness, even if it means violating the dignity of the dead. Thomas Harvey died in 2007, his name forever linked to the man he couldn't let go of. He spent 40 years as the keeper of the jars, a man who lived in the shadow of a genius he could never truly understand. As the echoes of today's story fade back into the archive, we're left once again at the edge of the unknown. Thank you for journeying with us to the fringes of history and science. If these mysteries resonated with you, we invite you to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing to our growing community of seekers. Share this transmission on your social networks. Your curiosity is what keeps these stories alive. We will return soon with another chapter that was never meant to be told. Until our next encounter, stay curious. This is Wikivedia Plus.